Winter night, wind howling, snow blanketing the forest in pristine white. In a small wooden cabin on the edge of town, a man cleaned dishes, preparing to spend another evening alone. Urgent knocking broke the silence. He opened the door, a woman clutching a 5-year-old child, both shivering, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, our car broke down. We just need shelter from the storm." He ushered them inside. When light fell across the woman's face, he froze. This was someone he'd loved, someone who disappeared without goodbye 6 years ago. And the child had eyes exactly like his. His name was Ethan Cole, 37 years old, single father working as a carpenter, living simply in a wooden cabin in the Vermont mountains where silence felt safer than the noise of cities, and memories couldn't find him as easily in the spaces between trees. He'd lost his wife 4 years ago, cancer that moved faster than hope could keep up with. Now he raised their 9-year-old son Liam alone, teaching him to work with wood, to find beauty in grain and patience in sanding, to understand that broken things could be made whole if you cared enough to try. Christmas approached. The radio warned of the worst snowstorm in a decade, but Ethan had prepared, stocked food, cut extra firewood, planned to spend the holiday making toys for Liam, carving animals and cars from scrap lumber the way his own father had done. He'd told his son before bed, "Don't open the door unless it's me. Storms make people desperate. We stay safe by staying careful." Near midnight, when Liam slept soundly upstairs, knocking shattered the quiet, not polite tapping but urgent pounding that spoke of emergency and fear. Ethan opened the door to find a woman wrapped in an inadequate coat, holding a small girl bundled against her chest, both of them shaking from cold that had soaked through clothing and into bones. "I'm so sorry. Our car died on the road. No cell signal. We've been walking for an hour, please. We just need warmth until morning." He pulled them inside immediately. No questions, no hesitation, just the automatic response of someone who'd been taught that helping wasn't optional when people needed it. He made hot tea, stoked the fire higher, brought blankets while they warmed their hands over flames that danced and crackled, and when the woman's hat fell, revealing her face fully, time stopped. Memories crashed over him like avalanche. Anna Brooks, 34 now but still recognizable, the woman he'd loved when they were young and learning trades, who he'd planned to marry until she vanished completely, phone disconnected, apartment empty, friends claiming they didn't know where she'd gone. She looked at him, tears forming. "Ethan, it's been so long." His voice came out rough. 6 years. I counted everyone. Flashback washed over him, their relationship during vocational school, studying late in coffee shops, planning futures that seemed inevitable, talking about children and the house they'd build together, then the car accident that hospitalized her, and when he went to visit, she was gone, released herself and disappeared. He'd received a message through a mutual friend that she'd left the state, that he should move on. He'd grieved like she'd died, because disappearing without explanation felt crueler than death. At least death was honest about being final. Now in his home beside his fire, the impossibility of her presence made reality feel negotiable. The little girl looked around with wide eyes, clutched her mother's hand. "Mommy, this man is so nice." Ethan knelt to her level, smiled despite the chaos in his chest. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Grace." She smiled back, and her eyes, the exact shade and shape of his own, stared back at him, carrying genetic truth louder than any words. When he brought out extra blankets and pillows, makeshift beds on the floor near the fire, he heard Anna whisper to the child, "Sleep now, Grace. Your daddy is very close." He stood in the doorway, those words hitting him like physical force, stealing breath and balance. The implication massive and impossible, and yet somehow inevitable the moment he'd seen those eyes that mirrored his own. Sleep didn't come for Ethan that night. He sat in the kitchen staring at snow falling outside, watching it accumulate on windowsills and transform the world into something unrecognizable. Thought about how his life had just done the same thing. One knock on a door during a storm and everything he thought he knew had become questionable. Anna appeared in the doorway. Couldn't sleep either. They looked at each other in darkness, punctuated only by dying firelight. "We should talk," she said. "Yes, we should, but not tonight. Tonight, let's just be grateful everyone's warm and safe. Tomorrow, we can unpack 6 years of questions." She nodded, understanding that some conversations need daylight and preparation, that midnight confessions during snowstorms carry too much emotion to be useful. "Thank you for opening your door," she whispered. "Thank you for knocking." They returned to their separate spaces, but neither slept. Both lay awake listening to wind howl and wood creak and children breathe, both wondering how fate had brought them back together in the middle of the worst storm in a decade, both terrified and hopeful about what morning would reveal. Morning arrived, but the storm had intensified. Snow piled against windows, roads completely impassable. Weather reports predicted at least 2 days before plows could reach mountain cabins. "We're stuck here until the storm passes," Ethan announced, trying to sound neutral rather than panicked about spending extended time navigating emotional landmines. Anna nodded quietly. Maybe fate wanted it this way. They made simple breakfast together, moving around the small kitchen in careful choreography, not quite comfortable but not hostile, just two people trying to figure out how to exist in the same space after years and secrets. Liam and Grace bonded immediately the way children do, unencumbered by adult complications. They built tiny snow houses from flour and water, played with Ethan's wooden toys, laughed with the pure joy of kids who'd found unexpected friends. Watching them, Ethan felt his careful emotional control cracking, seeing his son play with this little girl who might be his daughter, seeing her expressions that matched his own, her laugh that sounded like his mother's, genetics announcing themselves in 1,000 small ways. By afternoon, he couldn't wait anymore. While the children played, he asked Anna directly, "Why did you disappear?" She looked down at her hands, tears already forming. "The car accident. I was pregnant. The doctor said the baby might not survive. Said I should prepare for the worst. I couldn't bear making you go through that pain, watching me lose our child, so I ran, moved to my aunt's house 3 states away, figured a clean break would hurt less than slow grief." But Grace survived. His voice trembled. "Against all odds, she was born premature and fragile, but alive and fighting. By the time I knew she'd be okay, so much time had passed. I convinced myself you'd moved on, that showing up with a child you didn't know existed would ruin whatever life you'd built. So you decided for both of us, decided I wasn't strong enough to handle difficulty, decided our love wasn't worth fighting through complications. I was scared and young and thought I was doing the noble thing, but looking at you now, seeing the man you've become, I know I was wrong. I stole 6 years from both of you, and I can't take that back." The storm intensified. Power flickered, then died completely, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by firelight. All 4 of them gathered around the hearth, primitive and intimate, like stepping back in time to when families had no choice but to face each other. Grace started coughing, small at first, then harder, her breathing becoming labored. Anna's face went white with fear. She has weak lungs from birth if she gets sick without medicine. Ethan moved immediately to a cabinet, pulled out a medical kit he'd maintained carefully. "I keep antibiotics and breathing treatments. My wife was chronically ill. I learned to be prepared for respiratory problems." They worked together through the night, taking turns monitoring Grace's temperature, giving her medication, keeping her hydrated and calm, while wind screamed outside like the world was ending. In those dark hours, sitting beside a sick child, old hurt seemed less important than immediate care. Anna and Ethan fell into rhythm, communicating with looks and gestures, remembering how they'd once moved in sync, how love had made them extensions of each other. Near dawn, when Grace's fever finally broke and she fell into peaceful sleep, Anna said quietly, "She deserves to know the truth, deserves to know you're her father." Ethan stared into flames, voice rough with emotion. "I suspected the moment I saw her eyes. Certain things can't be coincidence." They sat in silence, exhaustion and revelation mixing into something that felt almost like peace. or at least acceptance that their lives had just become infinitely more complicated and somehow also more complete. Grace stirred in her fever dreams, called out weakly, "Daddy, don't go." Ethan moved to her side instantly, took her small hand, felt his heart break and rebuild simultaneously. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm not going anywhere." Anna watched them, tears streaming, seeing what she'd kept from both of them. The connection that existed despite years apart. Blood calling to blood even when neither knew why. When Liam woke and came downstairs, found his father holding another child's hand with the same tenderness he'd always shown his son, the boy didn't question it, just joined them, created a circle of warmth around the sick girl. "Is she going to be okay, Dad?" "Yes, buddy, she's going to be fine. She just needed someone to take care of her." "Good, I like her. Can she stay after the storm?" Ethan looked at Anna, the question hanging unspoken between them. After the storm ended, would she disappear again, or had fate given them a second chance to get this right? "I think that's up to Grace and her mom," he said carefully. Anna's voice broke. "If you'll have us, if you can forgive what I took from you, I'd like to try not rushing into anything, just seeing if we can build something from the pieces we both broke." Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cabin, surrounded by sleeping children and dying firelight, two people who'd loved and lost each other began the tentative work of finding each other again. Grace, fevered and delirious, called out, "Daddy, don't go," and Ethan held her hand tight, whispering, "I'm here now, baby girl." The next morning, the storm had eased, but snow still fell steadily. The world outside transformed into something unrecognizable. All landmarks buried, everything clean and new and impossible to navigate. Ethan sat by the window watching wind sculpt drifts into abstract shapes. Anna approached quietly, rested her hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry I stole those first 5 years. Sorry I decided you couldn't handle difficulty when you've clearly handled more than anyone should have to." He turned to face her. "I thought I wasn't worthy of being a father after my wife died. Thought I'd failed Liam by not saving his mother. But watching you with Grace, seeing how you've raised her alone, I realize none of us are perfect. We're all just doing our best with impossible situations." Grace, recovered from her fever, approached them carefully. "Mr. Ethan, why do you look like me?" Anna's breath caught. Ethan knelt to the child's level, took her small hands in his larger ones. "Because I'm your daddy, sweetheart. I didn't know you existed until you knocked on my door, but I've always been yours." The girl's eyes went wide, processing, then a smile spread across her face. "So I have two people who love me now?" He pulled her into a hug, let tears fall freely. "You've always had two people who loved you. We just didn't know how to find each other until a snowstorm brought you home." The first twist revealed itself when Ethan showed Anna his monthly charitable donations, automatic withdrawals to a medical fund for single mothers. She recognized the foundation immediately. "You're the anonymous donor who helped me through those first years, the money that paid for Grace's breathing treatments and hospital stays. That was you?" "I donated to help anyone who needed it. Didn't know it would be you. Just wanted someone out there to be warmer and safer than I felt." The circularity of it, him helping her without knowing while she raised his child without him knowing, fate working in loops and circles until the storm brought them together. The second twist came through the radio emergency broadcast. The bridge Grace and Anna would have crossed had they not stopped at Ethan's cabin had collapsed under snow weight. Several cars swept into the icy river below. Anna went pale. "If you hadn't opened your door, if we'd kept driving." "But I did and you didn't. We're here and safe, and that's what matters." The storm finally broke around noon, clouds parting to reveal blue sky and blinding sun reflecting off endless white, everything sparkling like the world had been remade. They stepped onto the porch together, 4 people who'd become a temporary family through crisis. Grace squealed with delight. "Daddy, look! The snow isn't scary anymore." Ethan lifted her up, held her against his chest. "Because we faced it together, scary things are less scary when you're not alone." Liam and Grace immediately started a snowball fight, laughter echoing through the silence. Anna and Ethan watched from the porch, standing closer than necessary. "What happens when the road's clear?" he asked. I don't know. I came here hoping to find you, planning to introduce you to Grace. The storm just accelerated everything. I have an apartment 3 hours away, a job I can't abandon, a life that doesn't easily fit into yours. Or maybe you came here because this is where you belong. Maybe those 6 years were just a detour, and now we're back on the right path. She leaned against him, let herself be held for the first time in years. I want to believe that, but I hurt you so badly, took so much from you. How can we build anything on that foundation? We build by choosing to. Every day we choose to forgive and try again and believe that what we have is worth more than what we lost. It won't be easy, but the best things never are. That evening they made dinner together, all four of them, a chaotic, beautiful mess of too many hands and not enough counter space. Grace standing on a chair to stir, while Liam set the table, Ethan and Anna bumping into each other and laughing, finding rhythm again. After the children went to bed, Anna showed him photos from Grace's life, birthdays and first days of school, holidays and ordinary moments, 6 years of his daughter's life in digital format. I took these for you, she admitted, always hoping someday I'd be brave enough to find you and share them, always believing we'd get back to each other somehow. He studied each image, memorizing features and expressions, trying to retroactively know his daughter through photographs, grief and joy mixing into something bittersweet. She's beautiful. You raised her well. She's kind and brave and exactly what I would have hoped for. She's half you, all the best parts. They sat close on the couch, comfortable silence settling over them. Outside the window, the porch light glowed warm against blue darkness. I never turned that light off, he said. Not in 6 years, kept it burning every night thinking maybe you'd see it from wherever you were. Maybe you'd know I was still here waiting. Anna cried then, really cried, years of guilt and loneliness and hope finally breaking free. I saw it tonight from the road, that light through the trees. That's how I knew to knock on this door instead of trying the next cabin. Some part of me recognized home. He held her while she sobbed, let her release 6 years of carrying everything alone, and somewhere in that catharsis they both felt the possibility of healing, of building something new from the ruins of what had been broken. When she finally pulled back, wiped her eyes, she said, "If we do this, try again. We do it right, slowly, making sure it's not just nostalgia or convenience, making sure we're choosing each other for the right reasons." Agreed. We take our time, let the kids lead the way, see where fate takes us now that we're finally paying attention. When did you get so wise? About 6 years ago when I lost everything and had to figure out how to keep living anyway. Pain teaches things success never can. If you believe some doors open not because of chance but because of kindness, comment I believe. 1 week after the storm cleared, Ethan, Anna, and both children drove into town for supplies. News of the rescue had spread. Small communities knowing everyone's business. People approached them in the grocery store, at the hardware store, expressing gratitude that everyone had survived. The local newspaper ran a story, Mountain Cabin Becomes Haven During Historic Storm, featuring a photo of the four of them on the porch, looking like a family, even though technically they weren't yet. Ethan was invited to speak at the community center about emergency preparedness, but what he said surprised everyone. The scariest thing during a storm isn't the weather outside. It's keeping our doors closed to people who need help. I almost didn't answer my door that night, almost pretended I wasn't home because helping felt complicated, and I would have missed everything that mattered. The town responded by creating a storm protocol. Every house with a porch light would leave it on during bad weather, signaling safe haven for anyone stranded. Anna found work at the local clinic, her nursing skills desperately needed in the rural area. She and Grace moved into a small rental house in town rather than returning to the city. Close enough for frequent visits but maintaining healthy boundaries. Ethan renovated his cabin, added a room for Grace for when she stayed over, built a larger dining table that could seat 4 comfortably, small changes that acknowledged this wasn't temporary. These people were becoming permanent parts of his life. The porch light that had guided Anna home became symbolic. Ethan carved words into the post beneath it. for every knock that's more than fear. Other families started leaving their lights on too, the valley glowing at night like stars had fallen to earth, visual proof that community meant caring for strangers as much as friends. Liam and Grace became inseparable, half-siblings learning to be full family, arguing and laughing and defending each other the way kids do when they've decided someone is worth keeping. One afternoon, Ethan found them building a wooden birdhouse, Grace holding boards while Liam hammered with his small hands, working together without prompting. "That's beautiful. What are you making?" "A house for birds who don't have homes," Grace explained seriously, "so they know they're welcome here." Anna, watching from the doorway, whispered, "They understand what we gave them without us saying a word." The local news picked up the story. Porch light protocol spreads across Vermont. What started in one small cabin becoming a movement. People choosing community over isolation, choosing to help rather than hide. Ethan received letters from families who'd been helped by the new protocol, strangers thanking him for starting something that had saved them. He kept every letter in a box labeled "Proof that opening doors matters." 6 months after that first knock, on a summer evening when fireflies danced and the air smelled like pine and possibility, Ethan and Anna sat on the renovated porch watching their children play. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't knocked on your door that night?" Every day I'm grateful for storms that force us to face what we've been avoiding. I spent 6 years thinking I was protecting you by staying away. Turns out I was just protecting myself from having to be brave. We're being brave now, that's what matters. She leaned her head on his shoulder. They'd been taking things slowly, dating like teenagers, making sure their relationship was real and not just convenient, but moments like this, comfortable silence and shared space, felt more permanent than any grand gesture. "I think I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" "To stop maintaining separate houses, to try actually being a family instead of just practicing." He turned to look at her, saw certainty in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "Completely. Grace asks every night when we're going home, and I realize she means your cabin, not our rental. She knows where she belongs, and so do I." "Then come home, both of you. Stay this time. From today forward, I choose to look at each other one heartbeat longer. I will live with kindness." 1 year after that knock in the snowstorm, Christmas Eve arrived again. The family gathered around the wooden table Ethan had built. 4 chairs that fit together perfectly, evidence of belonging. Liam asked, "Dad, should we leave the porch light on in case someone else needs help tonight?" Ethan smiled. "What do you think?" "I think we always leave it on because that's what home means." Grace, now 7 and thriving, asked from her seat, "Daddy, what if there hadn't been a storm? How would Mommy have found us?" "The universe would have found another way. Some doors are meant to open. Fate just chooses different keys." Anna, officially moved into the cabin for 6 months now, engagement ring glinting on her finger. Though they hadn't set a date, preferring to let things unfold naturally, looked at the porch light visible through the window. "That light didn't just guide me home. It reminded you to keep your heart open. People who never turn off their lights don't close their hearts either." They bundled up, stepped outside where snow fell gently, covering everything in fresh forgiveness. The porch light cast warm glow across white landscape, beacon for anyone lost. "This door is always open," Ethan said quietly, pulling his family close. "Even when no one's knocking, even when the storm has passed, we leave the light on because that's what love does. It stays ready to welcome anyone home." The children ran into the yard, making snow angels side by side, Grace shouting, "Look, we made a family of angels!" Liam added, "And they're all holding hands, just like us." Anna wrapped her arms around Ethan's waist. They stood watching their children, this family they'd created through crisis and choice, through loss and finding each other again. "I used to think running away was strength, that protecting others meant carrying everything alone. But you taught me that real strength is letting people in, letting them see you're broken and trusting they'll help you heal. We're all broken in some way. The question is whether we're brave enough to let others see the cracks, because that's where the light gets in, where connection happens." The porch light flickered slightly in the wind but stayed lit, had stayed lit for 7 years now. Burning through his wife's death and Anna's disappearance, and the long, lonely winters when he thought he'd spend his life alone. My father used to say that home isn't a place. It's a feeling you get when the people you love are safe, Ethan said. I finally understand what he meant. They called the children inside, made hot chocolate, hung stockings for all four of them, transformed the cabin into something that looked like the magazine version of Christmas, but felt realer, messier, more alive. As they settled by the fire, Grace asked, "Will you tell us the story again? About the night we knocked?" Anna and Ethan exchanged glances. They'd told it dozens of times, but children never tired of hearing how their family began. "It was the worst storm in a decade," Ethan started, "and the best thing that ever happened to me." The camera pulled back, showing the cabin from outside, warm light spilling from windows, the porch light burning bright, smoke rising from the chimney. Inside a family that existed because someone had been brave enough to knock and someone else had been brave enough to answer. Some doors don't open by chance. They open because kindness refuses to stay locked inside. If you believe one open heart can change an entire storm, share this story and subscribe. We tell real moments that remind the world that welcoming others home is how we find our own way back.